All right. So this is, I gotta move some stuff out of my way. I can't see the screen. This was Priscilla Hill's dissertation.
Yeah.
So the effectiveness of steward leadership in Christian nonprofit organizations. So I do recommend that you not cite dissertations, just because dissertations are somebody's first pass at doing research of this level. And
Okay.
I would say that once they have published this, that then if they continue to work in that field and have additional, just like Hernandez, she has years and years now of research. When I Googled her, found her Google Scholar page, which you can look up people's profiles in Google Scholar. So if they have a profile, it just means like if they're well published, they have all their stuff organized under their profile. And so she has a Google Scholar page, and it showed all the stuff she's done since her dissertation. So, you know, you can see that and say, okay, you know, this person is an expert in this. So I can start with her dissertation, but then
Okay.
show where she's, you know, done other stuff. So I would say, you know, Hernandez developed a model, and I don't have to say in her dissertation, she developed a model in 2000 whatever. And
Yeah, I think her dissertation's 2007, and I quoted some work from 2012 as well from her.
yeah, so you would show how it builds. So you'd say, you know, Hernandez created a model. You know, Hernandez 2007 developed a steward leader, you know, model or whatever. It was like a measurement thing or whatever. And then, you know, this and this, you know, so if she built off of that, you know, so it's okay to cite older stuff as long as you are then also, sorry, as long as you're then also, sorry, that's the video from the first call just popped up. So I gotta, okay. So, so this one, Priscilla Hills, she ends with this qualitative multiple case study aimed to explore strategies that effective leaders use in Christian NPOs. Chapter 1 provided an introduction. So she's summarizing the chapter that she just wrote, which is the same thing that she said basically in her introduction to chapter 1. She said, this is going to have background information, the problem, purpose, and research questions. And now in the summary of the chapter, she's saying, I said I was going to give you that, and I gave it to you. A conceptual framework, operational definitions, assumptions, limitations, and significance were presented. And then she says, when you publish your dissertation, it's all in past tense because it's like, you're like, I did this. So you can go ahead and be writing in past tense now because you will have done it. So, but you can also write in future tense now, like this study will look at. Just keep in mind that if you write that way, when you're finished, you have to go back and change all the present tense to past tense. So you might as well write in past tense now. Like just be like, I'm assuming I'm gonna finish this thing. And so go ahead, you can go ahead, and so you can see that she says the research questions and the rationale for the study were also included in this chapter, right? Always like just go ahead and write in past tense now, because you're gonna have to change it anyway. Okay, so she starts off her chapter 2 literature review. The purpose of this multiple case study was to explore strategies that effective leaders use in Christian NPOs. Like she literally just said that, you know, up here. That's what it's for. It doesn't matter. Your chapter 2 is a whole new, like it's a whole new paper. Like act like, you know, you're building off that first one, but you're starting out with that introduction. A critical analysis of literature demonstrated the need to complete this qualitative case study. So again, that's like demonstrated the need. She hasn't even given you the literature review yet. It's coming in the next paragraph, but again, you're talking in past tense. So when she says a critical analysis of the literature demonstrated the need to complete this qualitative case study to engage to identify the struggle of leadership, the stewardship and leadership effectiveness in Christian NPOs. So she's like saying this is what the literature review is. The purpose of this analysis was blah, blah, blah. So she introduced.
So,
Mhm.
so the whole chapter 2 is just a literary review.
Just the literature review. So she says this literature review contains a critical synthesis of the historical and current literature that focuses on supporting and contrasting theories of a conceptual framework, blah, blah, blah. So she's telling you in that the first paragraph, like, this is what's coming. It's going to be a literature review. And then this is a weird thing that CIU does. I haven't seen this in other dissertations, but they tell you to do this, so do this. The literature search yielded extensive research. You can't write this until you're actually done, because it's telling like that it came from 3 databases. Like, where did you get this information from? How many sources were there? See how she lists that out?
Okay.
Multiple sources. So by the time you're done with the literature review, you know, document where you're getting this stuff, like which databases are you using to find it and stuff like that. So document all that, because you're going to have to tell it. But then you're going to say these sources resulted in, well, you don't know that until you finish your literature review. But go ahead and write that and have your fill in the blanks ready, so that you can go back and say, you know, she had 261 references in her literature review, 201 which were peer-reviewed articles, 28 were seminal sources. Seminal sources means they were the first person to talk about something that then other research was built on, which helps you to defend why you have some old sources in there.
Okay.
All of the original seminal sources on steward leadership are going to be 30, 40 years old at least, right? That's when they started really talking about this 40 years ago.
Yeah, block is 93.
Yeah, so there's some old stuff in there, right? So it's like you're going to say blank were seminal sources, blank were seminal works. So we'll figure out what that means in a minute. But 3 were professional articles and 230 were from the year 2017 or later. What she's saying is, of my 261, 230 of them were, now she published in 2022, so that's 5 years. They're 5 years or less old, is what she's saying. So she's saying I met the criteria for the requirements for this. You know, that's what she's saying in this sentence. But in CIU dissertations, you have to have that. And it said that in the assignment. I can't remember if it's D or E. It said you had to include that. So that's where she puts that. She does an introduction to what the literature review is going to be, what her process for finding all this literature was. And then she kind of gives a roadmap for the literature review. The literature review began with the history and typology of leadership through source documents. So you're saying it began with like the history of a history of leadership, which you're going to do very small history, but then there was an overview of the relevant research in the field about well-known theories examining steward leadership, how they could be applied to NPOs, whatever. So she's telling you her organization that's about to come up. Okay, so then when she gets to all that description, we're 2 pages in, 2, 3. Yeah, so half a page, a full page, and another more than half. So 2.5 pages in, and she hasn't started her literature review. She's just been telling you what the literature review is, what it's about, what all is going to happen. And then the main point, the literature is organized using an overview of theories explored. Comparisons are made using the conceptual concepts considered throughout this study. The literature review relates to the effectiveness of steward leadership in Christian nonprofit organizations. That's her problem statement, where she talked about, you know, whether steward leadership was, you know, and includes gaps in theory to support the need for the current research. And that's where you're going. It's like you're telling everything you found, but you're also going to tell at the end what you didn't find. Like, we didn't find, you don't say I didn't, but no literature was found on this and this. That's why you need me. That's why you need me to do this research, right? And uh this is her area that she's studying. Then she jumps in. So the first thing she does is defines what is a nonprofit organization. If you're going to do your research in a Christian church, you could include this. I'm not a fan of putting this first because I think you need to get right into leadership and steward leadership first. But that's why in the example, it has like 3 little basic paragraphs and it says add additional headings or what, because it's how you see it. So you already have an outline. So you need to take that outline, decide which of those things need to be in here. And, she defines what is a nonprofit organization. You need to do that too, but do you see how far she goes? I mean, that's a lot just to define what that is. So you define, if you're going to do a Christian non-denominational, whatever, however you're defining your organization, you're going to use the literature to help people to understand what do you mean by that. Then she talks about for-profit organizations. And the reason that she wants to talk about for-profit is she needs to contrast that with not-for-profit so that she can show later how some steward leadership literature has looked at it in for-profit organizations. So see how she says, she's starting to throw that literature in there right now to say, here's how these things have been looked at, how steward leadership has been looked at in for-profit organizations. She goes on. Okay. So she starts hers with general leadership. I like the way you started talking about steward leadership right off the bat, but to talk about general leadership first. So I would, for your paper, because of the way you had it organized, I would talk about general leadership first.
Okay.
Here's leadership as a process. That Nordhaus also defines it in a similar way, but you can see that she cites a lot of different people who, put it within this kind of general concept. Talks about its process orientation quite a bit here.
I can follow the same thing.
Yeah, so start out with that.
General leadership.
I'm trying to see if so leadership definitions. I'm gonna do something like that. Okay, so this is the stuff I was talking about, leadership theories, including transformational, transactional, trait, great man, behavioral, so that right there under that leadership theories section. So there was, scoot. Okay, so she did that way later. Okay, that's okay though. Hers is organized how hers is organized. Yours needs to be organized how you saw it, how you saw it playing out. And that's, everybody's is different. So don't look at hers and go, oh, I need to organize mine like that. This section might fall in a different place in yours, but it still needs to cover similar things, right? So she says leadership theories, including transformational, transactional, trait. Again, don't use the word transformational if nothing that you found has anything to do with transformational or transactional or whatever. But you definitely are going to mention trait, great man, behavioral leadership, because you're going to talk about characteristics and behaviors and stuff. And so you have to talk about that under the general leadership theory area first, before you can talk about how steward leader looks at that. So she started with that and then goes into, according to leadership theory, managers behave as trustworthy stewards of an organization, blah, blah. So leadership, general leadership theory talks about managers being stewards. So you're already starting to introduce that, that there's a connection. Leadership is stewardship before you jump into stewardship theory. So you're going through all this leadership theory so that when you get to stewardship, they're like, okay, I see how this is a leadership theory, and the specific things that, and again, here you go. So she's quoting scripture, when it's appropriate, because it applies to, this says, the search for an inward motivation for stewardship emphasize biblical principles. So when they first were, looking at this inward motivation for stewardship, writers during that time, which was the 1800s, so 1800, 1820 to 1850, there was definitely a religious perspective on stewardship at that time. Then this next period, it's like this is how it was seen. And then stewardship theory is also a newer theory that used in organizational leadership. So then she starts, because this is an organizational leadership degree, right? So you got to tie it in with organizational leadership and how profitability becomes an important measurement of stewardship. If you steward things well, you should be more profitable. But in nonprofit organizations, it's this. Now, in your case, you wouldn't maybe highlight the church as a nonprofit organization, hopefully, but you're going to emphasize like you're trying to get it to an understanding of how stewardship in a church is. So you might not cite these people because they were talking about some other, they were talking about nonprofit organizations. She talked about NPOs. You're not talking about an NPO, which is like kind of, the church is a nonprofit organization, but it's not an NPO like they're talking about, like a missions organization or whatever.
Right.
You're finding stuff that fits in and helps it bring it down to from here's how the different ways stewardship has been evaluated. And then it became an organizational leadership theory that could be used to evaluate church leadership. And so you're looking for, is there anything in there that would like start wrapping it up and moving it toward a theory that can evaluate leadership in a church organization. So sorry, I'm flipping through this really fast, but I want to get to the next heading. So you can see how it's organized. And then she talks about the evolution of stewardship from Adam and Eve on, like God said, this is yours, take care of it. Not too much. I mean, she goes through that a little bit, but then she, jumps into, and so once you've looked at the history of it, now you understand like stewardship from the beginning, in the beginning. But you can see how, I mean, it's long, it's a lot. And that's what a literature review, that's why they say it's a minimum of 30 references. She's got 260 or whatever. Now, when she finished the 9942 class, she may not have had 260 because as you keep going, you're going to keep finding stuff and go, ooh, I should have talked about that, and going back and adding it. But the goal of 9942 is that you have a pretty complete literature review. I mean, it'll look like this, right? And so you're telling the story, you're going through and you're describing, so she talks about servant leadership theory. And the reason she talked about it is because if you look, and I read this, so I got to go dig in. She talks about characteristics of steward leaders, empowerment, okay. It hinges on the leader's motivation, things like that. So she does talk about servant leadership. And the reason that she talks about that, sorry, it's way down here. All their characteristics and all that. This right here. Greenleaf refuted any specific motivation for developing the servant leadership theory beyond essential management and leadership by reminding the reader that his purpose is to look at the organization, including the church, but not from within the church. Servant leadership to Greenleaf was absent of Christianity. It was not servant leadership from a perspective of the church or Jesus or anything. She says he did refer to Jesus, referencing his need to serve and passion for leading, but his theory is not out of the Christian understanding of servant leadership. She's contrasting that to steward leadership eventually. Sorry, this is a really long section. You do not have to write this much about servant leadership. Okay. She talks about transformational leadership too. Again, you only have to talk about that if the literature that you find, has a connection to that. So she goes into steward leadership then, and she says, this is now moving into the current research that you found on steward leadership. So here, there's Wilson. Steward leadership views the leader's primary identity and role as a steward managing the resources of one entrusted to their care. Don't put people's first names. Don't use Robert. That's a mistake. Clinton, 2018, proposed steward leadership in 1989 as one of 4 biblical models. There's Block and Roden. They elaborated on the model. So here's where you start to build, here's the seminal research, Clinton proposed this, then, oh gosh, my battery's back down. And then this, she's getting it to present day. This is what model we're going to work with. And the reason she talked about servant leadership is now she's going to talk about some research that talks about both. And the reason that she talked about transformational leadership is because she's going to talk about where steward leadership and transformational leadership have been studied together. So unless you're going to do that, you don't have to talk about it earlier, right?
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, but I would go through hers and